Hey, so firstly, just the sashay away thing I didn't know about, and I remember getting an email from one of my friends ages ago that was just sashay away, and now I'm so happy that I understand where the fuck I was referencing. Anyway, so now I'm just gonna probably, I'm going to talk about, present what props world is, and then what our world is, and then talk about representation, obviously, and why challenging gender norms is a really good thing that we should embrace. So, firstly, and this is going to include, I'm going to include RuPaul throughout this. So, because fuck you, Constance. Anyway, so, okay, in props world, we've had talk about racism, transphobia, and how that's a really bad thing, and of course that's a really bad thing, but it's already a feature in nearly every other reality TV show, right? So the industry, RuPaul's Drag Race is a reality TV show, and the industry itself that's inside is basically one that basically they use in reality you have to, the format of it, they have to insert a narrative, and the narrative has to be scandalous and it has to be easy to understand. So oftentimes they use stereotypes. So this is why racism and that sort of thing breeds within itself in reality TV. So I think what they're basically saying is that, okay, so yeah, there's this one show that has some representation of LGBT, but it's racist, so we should regret that, we should get rid of that. But every other reality TV show features racism in that sort of way, that's racist stereotype. No, thank you. And so this idea that that we should regret the one show that has some LGBT representation is, I think, quite false. No, thank you. And then I also want to say that, this idea that's really inaccessible, I think that, the vast different types of drag queens that they have on, the individuals, they go into their stories, they go into their hardships. I think it is a way that, even though maybe they're quite different to the vast majority of people who identify as LGBT, you can still identify in many of the hardships that I experience, because many of these people identify as queer or gay themselves, and have gone through this sort of alienation through in other aspects of their life. So I think that's really important, that it still is accessible in most ways. Then also the transphobic criticism. RuPaul actually did apologize for his transphobic remarks, and I also think that it's unfair. RuPaul might be a pioneer in this idea of drag, but I think it's unfair to put so much on him, because he is he's done a lot of work, but he's still trying to learn. There's still things that he doesn't completely understand. No, thank you. Anyway, so going to our world. So our world is all about representation. So drag, and in a sense, this concept of radically breaking gender norms. I think that's really important. Drag is probably the loudest and boldest way to kind of break gender norms, of course. I think that's pretty easy to see, because it's a performance, because it's so out there. I think its inclusion in mainstream now has opened the door for more gender-challenging portrayals in the media. So I just want a few examples. Have you guys ever seen Billions? There's a character on Billions, Taylor, who's the first gender-fluid character in mainstream media. That's really important, and that's probably wouldn't have happened 10 years ago when most audience didn't even know about this idea of challenging gender norms, of people not having a fluid identity. And then the same, there's other shows that feature Pose. Dumplings is a movie that really didn't need drag queens, but they decided to include them because they're fun and entertaining. That's what RuPaul's all about. And again, same with Queer Eye. No, thank you. So I think this is really important, and I'm going to explain to you how RuPaul's success has increased representation. Because, okay, networks and studios see that RuPaul's Drag Race has been a success, and they realize that not only is there a loud portion of the audience really passionately desire this sort of LGBT-focused media, right? And that's queer people, that's people who identify as LGBT. They really want this media, and they're quite passionate nowadays. But what's more important is this idea that the mainstream audience, people who don't identify as LGBT, they basically are more. The fact that RuPaul's Drag Race is a success now shows that they're accepting of these kind of risky, LGBT-focused content, right? And that there's not that much backlash. Like 20 years ago, there would have been backlash to a mainstream show like this because maybe, parent groups would be outraged over it, that people weren't accepting as gay people, that sort of thing. But now that there is acceptance, and that's really important. So basically, a network would want to find, would want more LGBT-focused content because of the fact that they know that there is a passionate audience out there who really desire this, and also because they know that the general audience is accepting of that. That's not a risky investment if they go for it. And again, as I presented with the examples I've shown you, this is across the board. This isn't just in reality TV, which I said is filled with racism and bad stereotypes. This is across the board in many medias where the portrayals are more realistic and more and less problematic. Okay, so why is representation good? Representation is good because, of course, it helps give a platform to LGBT artists and creators. So LGBT studios are now more likely to select LGBT creators to create the content, this LGBT-focused content that they want to put forward. And I think another thing that's really important is that they realized that, say, even within drag itself, like, drag is no longer a joke, right? Drag, like, the performance of drags are artists. They're taken seriously, and I think that's really important in the general aspect of things. That these LGBT culture is no longer considered a farce. It's considered something very realistic, yes.
I think at the point at which you make these things competitive, you teach people that there's a value that can ever be ascribed to drag. There's a better kind of drag and a worse kind of drag. How can that be something they can be willing to defend in different ways?
Okay, so I understand this idea of, like, oh, how dare it be a competition, but you could say the same thing about America's Next Top Model. Oh, these models, different models can have different standards of beauty. How can one be better than the other? I think it's a competition. That should be irrelevant to this actual debate. It doesn't really factor in too much. And then also, it helps normalize gender, really quickly, help normalize gender challenging attitudes, which can help the mental health of people, say, young and old, who surround themselves with gender normal expectations throughout their lives, but who maybe have desired to actually challenge those norms. And this shows that they're not weird for wanting to challenge those norms, and it helps their mental health because they realize they're not the only ones out there who maybe thinks that, oh, I really want my hair short, or I really want to wear makeup, that sort of thing. And it also normalizes it for cis people who probably never had those desires, but they realize that, oh, hey, these people aren't that, like, these people are normal people, right? That, like, they can be cool, they can be funny. That makes those, like, it gives, it lessens the alienation of those people. Oh, so the only drag person I knew before RuPaul's drag show was Ursula from My Little Mermaid, who was a villain, so good on for more representation. Thank you very much.
Cool, thanks so much for that.
Sorry, I have a lot of paper. Okay, so like many people here, I haven't watched RuPaul's Drag Race either, but I'm an English student and my entire degree is based on preaching profound bullshit about books I haven't read and shows I haven't watched, so I was fine. So I'm going to start with some rebuttal, but then I have two main points. So representation, but by LGBTQ people, like of LGBTQ people, and why it's important and why it's different. And then as well, like stereotypes, and also basically my rebuttal is going to be about internet culture and what Connie has brought to us. So basically, Connie was saying like, oh, it's actively detrimental because it defines what the LGBTQ community is to people, and it's generally inaccessible, and it perpetuates stereotypes. So first of all, my first issue is, sorry, I'm just going to rip apart what you said. First of all, you make a point of like the negative things that come out of RuPaul's Drag Race, right? That like there's issues like transphobia, etc. in it. And that is true, like these things do happen. However, what's happened, first of all, like as Bree said, like he apologised. But secondly, the other thing that comes out of this, and it's really important, is internet discourse. Because the unfortunate thing is, there's a lot of like, there's a lot of transphobia, etc., within the LGBTQ community, which is otherwise ignored. And what happened was, when this happened, people started paying attention to it at last, because the show is so well known. So there's loads of internet discourse. It opens up like an avenue for people to complain about this, to talk about it, and to pay attention to it. And second of all, you were talking about other productions that don't get funding. Well, I don't think that this is like true, because like we've seen that the show is super popular and there's a demand for it in the market. So like, of course, people are going to capitalise on that and start creating shows which are similar, because like, oh, this did well, now we have to recreate it. And that's how popular culture works oftentimes. Like, oh, this X thing worked really well, so now we're going to do the exact same thing or something very similar. Because people we know will buy it, or people will like watch it, and that's what happens with culture. So I think on to my first point of like, okay, so what you're talking about, like what is being said about stereotypes. Once again, this is an awful lot of rebuttal about like how stereotypes, which are like behaviours carried out by like a large vocal proportion of the community, usually a very visible group, and that's why people are making them. My argument is that like the problem lies with observers on the outside rather than the actual show itself, and it's wrong to place the blame on the show for perpetuating stereotypes, because first of all, this is reality TV. We know that it's reality TV, and all reality TV exaggerates for entertainment. This isn't an issue for RuPaul's Drag Race specifically. It's an issue for all the reality TV, like Love Island, etc. Don't want to start naming them off. So, like, despite the fact that it's reality TV, it doesn't actually want to be wholly accurate. It only shows a certain small group, like in RuPaul's Drag Race, and it does entertain LGBTQ plus people who are surrounded by straight media. It's a break from that. So, like, the problem lies with the observers who are watching this, and then they decide that this is representative of all LGBTQ plus people, because it's advertised as reality TV. We know that it should never be taken as a complete accurate depiction. Like, the second thing is, it is brought to us by an LGBTQ member of the LGBTQ plus community. Oh my God, so it's brought to us by RuPaul, who is a member of the community. It's not filtered through straight lens. It's offering us what one person in the LGBTQ community, their interpretation of it, and their interpretation of drag. Yes, it's limited, but once again, we should never take a book or a show to be representative of everyone. It's only of some people. Everything is filtered through someone's lens. So we think that we think it's good that we see people from the LGBT community finally represented in reality TV, because they're surrounded by straight media all the time. It's often ignored. So it gives the potential for other people who are in the LGBTQ community to start up a drag race, to like, we have flaws in Drag Race, but because these flaws are talked about on the internet discourse, due to the cult following that dominates Twitter, it means that the flaws have a greater reach, so we know what they are. So it means that in the future we can avoid them because we're aware of what they are. We can, other people who want to start up something similar can actually have start-up shows which avoid the issues that we've seen in RuPaul's Drag Race, because we've talked about it. And we've also talked about as well, like, how it encourages experimentation, and I think that is really good because, like, I know so many people who have, like, been introduced to drag by RuPaul's Drag Race. Yeah.
How can it be that you're encouraging this sort of like sort of interpretation and experimentation when every year it's this sort of like homogenous queen that is always winning? This teaching that there's a wild idea of drag and a successful idea of drag. How is that promoting experimentation within the LGBT community at all?
Well, I think it actually does, because, like, and not everyone's going to be able to, like, emulate that, and people are aware of this discourse on Twitter, which is I've already said, like, people are criticising it for that on Twitter, and, like, that's the negative discourse that's coming out about it means that in the future the path can be paved for shows which break the issues that we've seen with the LGBT with Drag Race, and that's true. Like, it's always a thing with Twitter discourse that, like, whenever people get really angry about one thing on a show, they the next person that comes along tries to avoid it and tries to stop that. So it does encourage experimentation amongst young LGBTQ plus people who may already have, like, be questioning of it. So I think the issues that are being brought by proposition lie less with the actual show and lie more with the interpretation of the viewers instead. So that is all I have to say. I'm proud to oppose.
Drag is about many things. It is about clothes and sex. It subverts the dress codes that tell us what men and women should look like in our organised society. It creates tension and it relieves tension. It confronts and it appeases. It's about questioning the meaning of both gender and sexual identity. It is about anarchy and defiance. Drag is subversive to the extent to which it satirises heterosexuality's claim over gendered expression, and it is about anarchy and defiance. I don't think RuPaul's Drag Race and that specific kind of drag that we popularise in the mainstream achieves this. I think it dilutes it. How? Drag isn't resistant and it isn't something that belongs to the community at the point at which it's performed competitively, especially in the reality TV competition structure. If we were really going to get this sort of discourse that this entire side is talking about, like RuPaul's Drag Race would be a showcase rather than a competition, which it isn't, right? And I think I'm going to kind of get into that in a little bit, right? So reality TV success and making it big is about how likeable you are, not about how likeable you are to your own community within that drag community, but to the mainstream, right? Because you need to get as many people watching the shows so the prizes can be better. You need to get as many people involved and having debates about it on Twitter and with their friends and stuff for the competition to be really a viable thing. How are you going to do that? You have to appeal to as many people as possible. You can't appeal if you're confrontational. You can't appeal if you're creating this sort of tension, or if you create confusion or guilt. So you have to be palatable, sanitised, fishy, funny. This is the only way to bring sort of ease and watchability to a traditionally loaded thing with a lot of loaded history like drag. Drag should be loaded. It should be, I think it's at its best when it is a protest, because that's what it was invented for, that's its origins, and to pretend anything otherwise is to completely ignore and disrespect that history. To appeal, this means that winners and finalists are usually really fishy, thin, white. They don't play too much with gender or experiment too much outside of going from looking very masculine to looking very traditionally hyper-feminine, right? So this is they're satirising one specific form of femininity and nothing else, really, right? So gender performance, resistance and satire is complicated by punishing maleness, peeking through all the sort of layers of makeup and making jokes about those kind of things, furthering the narrative that gender is binary, taking out all of their stuff about discourse and understanding gender at the point at which RuPaul starts every challenge by saying, "Gentlemen, start your engines, may the best woman win." There's two options there and nothing else in between, right? Queens in RuPaul's Drag Race who embody gender fluid and drag personas regularly express their desire to stay true to themselves, their aesthetic and their take on gender and their take on satirising gender, but are quickly sent home or reprimanded for not being able to diversify their look, as if Ru has ever in his entire career done anything daring with her look, because it's always been hyper-femme, plastic, Barbie. But Ru aside here, this is about something bigger and this is about the mainstream. There's just a couple of things, right? RuPaul's Drag Race has yet to diversify its unspoken qualifications for success, which seems to be at odds with the increasingly diverse and the originally diverse nature of drag itself, and definitely at odds with Ru's winning characteristics of charisma, uniqueness, nerve, and talent. I'm not sure why it is that it's only hyper-feminine queens who have this uniqueness, because surely it's not unique if they're the ones winning every single time, right? Is it unique to perform drag in this way? I'd argue no, because fantastically snatched and thin, hyper-feminine queens like Violet Chachki continuing to be praised, fan favourites, is problematic because their drag is replicating values already rooted in and working for the dominant normative views of gender, rather than subversing and challenging those outright like other sort of gender fluid queens are doing. So these queens, when we do have sort of a trans queen thrown in there, while appearing distinct from each other, are eliminated or normalised through discourses of natural beauty or natural femininity and stereotypical depictions of womanhood. So they're rewarded. There's a value judgment there that drag is valuable in as much as it makes money and appeals to straight people and institutions like the Emmys and stuff like that. And it doesn't rock the boat. It doesn't subvert the purpose of drag at all, which is what the point of drag is, what the point of drag has always been, right? Fans weigh in on who should go home without ever understanding the history of the values behind it, because if they did, they wouldn't be endorsing a competition at all. So when Ru says things like "start your engines" and may the best woman win, the sort of slight pause there and the alternate inflection just clues in even the most least attentive viewer that there's something different and there's something funny about these women, and this does a few things. Firstly, it sort of perpetuates this binary idea of gender, which I think I've already explained. But secondly, puns like this and this whole "you've got she-male" delegitimise and satirise the lived experience and the lived reality of drag, which is what we're here supposed to be debating about, right? But whether or not this makes these things better. It makes the very real expressions of humanity and vulnerability of these trans and experimental queens less valuable when juxtaposed against them, when forced to exist within that structure. I think it also sends out the message that there's one right way of doing drag. I think that that's particularly harmful for like straight people who are then like are going more likely to insert themselves into sort of like places where they don't really belong, like gay clubs, and go to see drag shows, and think when they don't necessarily appeal to them in the same way that RuPaul's Drag Race doesn't, that it's not really as good. I think that's the impact of this. I think it's straight people invading queer spaces and getting to dictate what is and what isn't acceptable, what is and what isn't good. It's straight people touting that money over them, touting that success over them, that fandom, all of that over them, saying that it has to appeal to me and it can't be as subversive as you want it to be because it's just not as fun, right? Because drag, particularly in the context of RuPaul, is not cool when it's a coping mechanism or a protest, when it's taking the fun out for straight viewers, and it's too much reality for this reality TV show, right? Because Ru demonizes and punishes them, dictating if they want it too much, if they're too competitive, they're too bitchy. This sort of villain editing is something that's really common on reality TV in general, but also specifically to RuPaul's Drag Race, because it messes with the narrative and dictates the viewer's perception. Takes someone on this view when they only see certain aspects of that queen, that they're like kind of bad, and that this is especially harmful in that mainstream, because it does not, the narrative does not provide any of the hope they tell you it does. If anything, it tells you you can't even win in your own community where you're supposed to feel safe. You're never going to be as good as the people who can assimilate and who can look fishy or whatever. So for all the camp associated with drag, it's a nuanced art and a political statement with a lot of history. There's something positive about normalising something that used to be shameful, but on the other hand, when you do that, you completely erase the origin. Misappropriation happens when people lose sight of its history and when it becomes a commodity, rather that the originators don't benefit from. The originators in these sort of like dance balls in New York City, these poor black trans drag queens who never ever win, right? These sort of protest structures lose value when they're a marketing tool, and then these terms lose values when they're borrowed, because they lose their ability to convey a specific sense of identity and a specific sort of like memory of history. I think if you can't accept all of a community for as messy and diverse as it is, you can't do any of that. So if you can't love yourself, if you can't love the community in its entirety, how the hell are you ever going to love anybody else? Very cool.
Okay, so just to clarify what this debate is about. So, on opposition, we don't explain why RuPaul's Drag Race is a perfect representation of the LGBT community. We don't say that it's absolutely flawless, that it's perfect, that it is done like absolutely like no harm whatsoever. Essentially, what we have to say is why a world in which RuPaul's Drag Race was successful as a TV show is better than a world without it. And just to respond to Claire's point, I don't think it's really fair for opposition to say, on our side of the house, we can say that there was another alternative show that was just better in every regard. For one, I don't think it's actually realistic to say that. This whole thing about there being a void in the market, that doesn't necessarily mean that lots of people were like asking RuPaul, like, please make the show about about drag queens, like this is like what the people want, etc. In fact, like for the first couple of seasons, like it didn't really have like many people watching it outside the LGBT community. It was just then it became more popular, like gained mainstream success eventually. And in fact, like RuPaul, like he's probably like one of the most successful drag queens in America. He had like lots of success in the 90s. It very much like he had a lot of influence and he made the show happen. So I think it would be very unlikely that we would have had a similar show were it not for RuPaul creating RuPaul's Drag Race. So like I don't think it's fair for them to say that they will gain the same benefits by simply having another show. But anyway, so first I'm going to explain like why it was important that RuPaul's Drag Race was successful with the show, and how this impacts like the LGBT community, and also how like impacts like people outside the community, and why it just like benefits the LGBT community as a whole. So first of all, as already mentioned, like RuPaul's Drag Race is like a show like by a drag artist, like featuring predominantly people from the LGBT community. So it's important that things like this are a success, so that like people, like networks who be investing in things like that, can see that that they can take a chance on people like creating this kind of content. Because if like were not for this, if the show hadn't been a success, then more than likely the LGBT representation would be like created by straight cis people, where it's like one token like gay person in every show, and it would have just continued for a long time. Like it's important for things like this to be a success and to gain this popularity, like for for like networks to invest in more content like this. Essentially, when this is successful, we just end up getting more LGBT content overall, because they know that it's worthwhile investing in this, that people are going to watch it essentially. And yet the whole thing about it's not the most authentic representation of drag, etc., that is too palatable. For one, I think to a certain extent shows that has to be palatable to a wide audience to be successful and to be popular. I don't think it completely takes away from the whole point, however, although I don't think it's fair to say because it isn't entirely representative that it just wasn't good overall, because it did what it needs to do to be successful, and because it was successful, it has brought a huge visibility to the community, and more emphasis that I'm going to talk about in a moment. So yeah, okay, so first of all, first I'd like to talk about the success of those involved in the show. It has had a huge impact on the careers of so many people who are involved in it. No, thank you. And that really is a very important. That really is so important, because so many LGBT people face discrimination in the workplace, or underemployed, and drag queens especially. So it's huge. All people involved in the show, for one, is really launched their careers, and also the fact that it is successful, it just means that there's more demand in general for content like this. So I think it can help lots of drag queens overall, just because now more people are aware of drag as an art form. There are more people no thank you who actually want to go and see shows like this. So I think it's good for drag as a whole that it generally it now has a wider audience base for all those who are working in it, because now it's just going to help the careers of so many people working in this area. And also and then how this impacts LGBT people overall, having this representation. So first of all, just having representation on the show in general it's so important for people even just to be aware that this is the thing, because maybe now there's a lot more content, but at the time it was created, so many people probably didn't even know what being trans meant, for example. Even just to turn on the TV and see that, it really does make such an impact on, no thank you, on people watching it. And the fact that it creates a dialogue that really is so important, even just for people. Yes.
You say it creates a dialogue, and this has come up a lot before. I think the widespread viewership of the programme isn't the same as a small bunch of people battling it out on Twitter. How can you say that it creates a widespread discourse within society when the people who are discussing it are going to be the people facing the issues of it already, and the widespread representation is still going to be largely negative of the LGBT?
It isn't even necessarily there's going to be huge in-depth conversations about it, but even for people to be aware of that being trans is a thing or whatever, or being aware of drags in art form, because I think at the time this came out, a lot of people generally didn't realise so much about it. Even just for people to turn on TV and to see drag queens, it really does make a huge difference. It makes a difference for people LGBT people see themselves represented, and also it's important for people who aren't LGBT, as I've already mentioned, to be aware of this, even just for their own understanding. And also it's very important that the mainstream community, this also includes LGBT people, for people who are questioning their identity, or who are closeted or whatever, because for a lot of people essentially basically this is a good platform for people who aren't going to seek out this kind of information themselves. That's why it's so important that it's mainstream, that it isn't just people who actively are going to seek out that information. So that extends to people outside the LGBT community, but also those within it who are closeted or questioning, or just honestly wouldn't be aware of these varied identities were not for them being able to turn on their TV and see things like that. Because it is important that it is represented on TV. And I think right now we are getting a lot more varied representations. We might say it's not good if it isn't realistic, but at the time it came out, it really did pave the way for so many other things. So in a world without it, we probably wouldn't have the varied representation that we see nowadays. Yes, and also it's important that it was successful, because when the show is more high profile, there is more accountability. As we mentioned, how RuPaul apologised for being transphobic. Honestly, if it wasn't a success, if it didn't have the wide audience base, there wouldn't have been as much backlash, and it probably wouldn't have changed. You do get the accountability when you have a wider audience base. And now I have a lot of buttons to try to get through, so I'll try to get through that now. Okay, so yeah. Okay, the whole thing about more authentic drag, etc. As I already said, more than likely, more kind of local drag queens or whatever are going to get a wider audience base now for people watching. So there is still authentic people out there, but now there'll actually be more people going to see these shows because they are more aware of drag as an art form. And also so I'll just try to wrap it up now. So yeah, people like drag queens and drag artists and LGBT people like are so often like historically been ostracized in society and like been the outskirts of it, and now like they're not only like acknowledged in mainstream media but are being like celebrated by it. And like this isn't something we should regret. Like we should like celebrate the progress that has been made, that we're able to get to this point. And RuPaul's Drag Race was like huge in paving the way for this. So thank you to RuPaul's.
I